I'm the tin dog. Overdue Doctor Who review time, and we are now up to School Reunion. In my mind, the first great episode of Series 2. We have so much going on here that I absolutely love. And going back and revisiting it, the stuff that I love is still so good. And there's a couple things that didn't used to bother me, but do now. And that's not to say that I'm now recognizing flaws that I, didn't notice before, but as my own perspective on Doctor Who and life in general has shifted, there's some things that this episode does that I now kind of don't like, and we'll get to those. But sort of starting with the stuff that I love. First of all, this is a very Buffy the Vampire Slayer feeling episode of Doctor Who. Part of that is aesthetic, because it's set in a school, and oh, look, there's Anthony Stewart heads. Head, singular. He's only got one. In the school, it's like it's Giles. But even beyond just that, it does have that feel and that vibe of something weird at the school. These people are behind it. And some of the dialogue as well. Like there's one line especially from Mr. Finch, from Anthony Stewart Head's character. Where he goes, ignore the shooty dog thing. I mean, shooty dog thing, that sounds like almost a straight Whedon lift. So it's got that vibe to it, which is probably why, especially on initial viewing, when I was, because I had my initial hook in because I caught the Satan Pit on TV when I was in London, and then I went back Series 1, and I was really enjoying it. But for a while, certainly upon first viewing, this was my favorite episode. I think it's because I felt that connection and that similarity to another thing that I already loved, which is, of course, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But there's a lot of neat little humorous moments, like when the oil gets on the cafeteria worker and like they take her off into this other room, and they're making sure Rose doesn't call an ambulance, and one of them goes, "She's fine." Ah! Pfft, and there's smoke coming out behind her. She's fine. She does that. Just ducks back in. I'm sorry, that's great. And a lot of the things that are done in terms of the dynamic between the Doctor and Rose and Sarah Jane, and which brings us, of course, to Sarah Jane Smith. How awesome is it that she was reintegrated into the show at this point? This was my introduction to her as a character, because I hadn't started exploring classic Who at this point when I saw this the first time. I mean, I knew who she was. I kind of looked up enough about Doctor Who as a thing to know that she was a person who existed, and sort of knew what K9 was, but I hadn't seen anything with them in it. So seeing that dynamic, and she plays off Tennant really well. His excitement at meeting her, like that's another kind of a bit of a fourth wall break moment, because you feel like, well, that's David Tennant's excitement at meeting her. I mean, the Doctor's too, but that's David Tennant just channeling his own excitement at getting to do this with her. And I think it was an interesting call, and I think it, especially in terms of the scope of how the relationship between the Doctor and Rose builds, to have the dynamic between the three of them play a bit like a guy, his girlfriend, and his ex. Which, Mickey points out blatantly, but I think that's an interesting way to play it, and made for, a dynamic that was just antagonistic enough, but didn't tip over, because, sort of the ladies woke up to him, they're like, what are we doing? Which was good. It needed that moment. I want to come back to Anthony Stewart Head, though, because I will never, ever stop being irritated at the fact that Mr. Finch never came back. And don't tell me, oh, he blew up. Like, how did Davros live at the end of Journey's End? And besides the fact he wasn't affected by the oil when that blew up, all the other Quillitanes around him are screaming like, that's not affecting him, so he's obviously tougher than them. He could have survived that explosion. Why has he never come back? He is such a good villain. The presence that he has. Like, up to that point, he was in many ways, I feel like, certainly the first human portrayed villain that felt like he could stand up and just face to face with the Doctor. There have been some good villains up to this point. The Daleks, obviously, but, you know, they've got a lot of past history baggage they get to sort of stand on a bit. Plus, you know, Pepperpot. But then, you know, the Empty Child, which is functionally a villain, is great, but it's a threat. It's not necessarily a character. As a character, as someone who can stand face to face with the Doctor and say, you know, what he said, you know, stand up to him, face him down, go, you're not going to win. You believe him because he has that sense of authority and the delivery. And I don't think it really happened prior to that in this series. And I'm not sure how many times it's happened since. And the fact that he's never come back is just so frustrating. What is going on? Hello?
您好。
And the other thing that I love that he brings is that he feels like a fully formed character. When he's talking with Sarah Jane, he actually has this wonderful sense of pride in the fact that the school's doing so well. So, like, even though, you know, he's got this master plan and all this stuff, he's also like, oh, she's writing a piece about me. And you're like, you've got an ego. And that comes across really well. And that's not especially relevant to the plot that he has an ego like that, but it's a touch that gives him a roundedness, makes him feel like a more complete character. And, you know, actually sort of coming back to the school, the fact that we open up with a student who has knowledge way beyond what he should have for this time and place at Earth, that's kind of a nice, subtle-ish callback to An Unearthly Child, the very first episode of Doctor Who, because that was Susan. That was the Doctor's granddaughter. You know, had all this knowledge she should not have had. And got her teachers curious. And that kind of happens here, only this time the teacher is also the Doctor. K9 coming back is fun. K9 is a character that, when used correctly, i.e. sparingly, is a lot of fun to have. He can get overused because, I mean, it's a robot that barely moves, and, you know, but John Leeson brings a surprising amount of personality across, even in the robotic sounding voice that he does for the character. Mickey's fun in this. You know, I like his use in it, but like I said, there are the handful of things that on a rewatch didn't used to bother me, but now kind of do. And one's just like a personal things, one something that the more I think about, the more I'm like, and then one is just a nitpick, and I don't know what order I'll do. I'll start with the nitpick because it's what I'm most likely to forget, and that's the whole thing. This is the episode that introduced the whole Deadlock seal. You know, that the sonic screwdriver can't open a Deadlock seal. And what I don't like about that is just it's I have my weird relationship with the sonic screwdriver in the first place, because there are plenty of fans who are annoyed at it and feel like it's overused as, you know, something that fixes everything. I don't really have that problem with it, but it does kind of bug me that we just arbitrarily came up with, oh, except for this, so that they can just drop the term deadlock every now and then when they want it to not work. Whereas, I mean, I feel like it would have felt like a proper nerfing of the sonic screwdriver if it had been more something like, you know, I don't know what this thing is, so the sonic can affect it, but I don't know what to do with it. The software doesn't know how to deal with it. You know, something along those lines. Something that has a little more thought into it rather than, this can open anything. Oh, except that one thing. And it's not quite like the doesn't work on wood, which functions as a joke. This, you know, the deadlock thing just gets dropped in, and then every time I hear the term deadlock, it just kind of annoys me because it's such a cheap restriction on the sonic screwdriver. And again, it's weird for me to complain about that because other people will say the sonic screwdriver in itself is a cheap way to move the story forward, and I'm annoyed at the way they didn't put more thought into how they nerfed it, whereas other people are more annoyed that they don't put more thought into how the Doctor does stuff rather than just have the sonic screwdriver get waved around. I don't know. Different hang-ups. So the thing that, like, on a personal level, I just don't love. I don't love that as a cold open, a child dies. Like, especially given the overall jovial, sort of light-hearted feel of the episode on the whole, I've never loved, underage character deaths, and now being a parent, I find them really unsettling, especially when they're done this casually and this, no significance given to it. I'm not saying you can never kill a child in a narrative, but like if a child dies, I feel like that should be important. And to have a child just be here's the random no-name person that we're going to kill during the cold open to establish that there's a threat. I'm like, I am honestly really not comfortable with that. And again, that's me, that's my hangups, that's my baggage, that's the things that just don't sit well with me, so that's not an inherent flaw. And the last thing is that now the more that I've thought about it, the more that I've grown up, and now having rewatched the episode, I'm like, yeah. So, in terms of how Sarah Jane Smith is handled, first of all, Elizabeth Sladen plays her brilliantly. She's awesome in the part. And like I said, the dynamic of Sladen sort of functionally within, the interactions of those three characters is like the ex-girlfriend works. That's fine too. But what gets to me is how much emphasis they put on how important the Doctor was to her. And it's not to say that the Doctor wouldn't have been important to her and to her life, but some of the specifics that they plant, the idea that she didn't just wait for him, she never stopped waiting for him. And some of the lines she has at the tail end, like to the point of implying like she feels like she hasn't been living her life properly because she's been waiting for him to come back. The idea, that she never had kid is sort of tied to the no one else could measure up to him. I recognize that the Doctor's going to be one of the most important periods of her life. And I also know that, the way in which the fourth Doctor left her was not expected. She didn't choose to leave at the time that she did. So there's a reason for her to be annoyed and have baggage about that. But the degree they just take it too far. As far as the extent of how little she'd lived after that. And again, a part of it's implied, but some of it's made really explicit that she kind of felt like she had an empty life after that. And that feels wrong. It feels wrong for her as a character, and it feels cheapening to an ordinary life. I would like to think that her time with the Doctor would be like if you or I had a whirlwind jaunt, around the world. And, we come back and we live our life after that, and we think back on it and go, yeah, that was good. I miss times like that. But it doesn't kneecap your ability to live your life, or it shouldn't. And with her, they kind of had to do that, and I don't love that idea. The idea that the companions never get over the Doctor. I accept that the companions never forget the Doctor, and that they're happy to see him again. But the idea that they never get over him, I don't love that as a concept. And it kind of comes back again in some ways later on down the series, and it's become one of those things that again, they were in the right ballpark, but they pushed it too far. And it was annoying for me to realize how much that does kind of bother me. But it also doesn't completely sink the stuff that works, because the villain is great, a lot of the jokes are great, the character dynamics are great, the overall pace and flow of the episode is great. It's a good, fun episode. I still do really love it, and I still do consider it to be certainly one of the best of the second series, if not one of the best Tennant episodes. But yeah, coming back to it now, there are these things that I notice. And, when you revisit, it's funny, when I revisit episodes that I didn't like as much, or I don't remember liking as much, I'm sort of hunting for what's good about it, so that I can highlight that and try and remember it next time, so that I don't think it was just a complete piece of garbage. But when I go back and rewatch episodes that I like, I the opposite kind of happens. I can't help but sort of look for the flaws and go, how rose-tinted were the nostalgia goggles I was looking at this through? And there you go. So, school reunion. What are your thoughts on it? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff you can do because there's buttons and there's links. Whole bunch of links, including one to my Patreon if you feel generous. But all that's down in the description. Check it out if you want. If you don't want to, that's okay. Because at the end of the day, folks, you are the council. And I just run the meetings. Until next time, this council is adjourned.